Many people have asked about what kind of GMRS radio I use in my Jeep. And in fact, not long ago, I made an entire video about the radio that I use in my Jeep and the identical radio that my wife uses in her Jeep. For those that may have missed that video, I do not use a GMRS radio. Indeed, it is a fact that in both Jeeps, I have a Motorola XTL 5000 110 watts radio. And yes, irregardlessly of what many of the online experts tried to tell us all on that previous video, my Motorola XTL 5000 radios are indeed 110 watts radios, as indicated by the specification sheet provided by the guys that actually made the radio, who I am guessing actually know more about the radio that they made than all of those online experts. Anyway, that video really just went over the hardware and the nuts and balls of the radio and not how I have it configured. So in this video, I will very quickly revisit the physical nuts and balls of the radio in my Jeep, and as a special added bonus, I will also quickly go over how the radio is configured and how I use it. And as an even more special bonus and for your added viewing pleasure, I will not be begging you to click on the subscribe button, nor shall I try to teach you what clicking on the notification bell does, like all of those other much more desperate YouTubers seem to always do. Nay, because on this channel I serve only meat and potatoes, not begging bits. This is my antenna. There are many like it, but this one is mine. And this one is also mine, but it's on my wife's Jeep. These are both Midland MXTA 26 GMRS antennas, and as you just saw with your very own eye holes, I have the same antenna on both Jeeps. And the radio setup in both Jeeps is also identical. The antenna ground plane where I have my antenna mounted is not the best, and yet, in despite of what all of the online experts have proclaimed, the antenna still has an SWR of 2:1 or so, and I regularly talk 30 miles or more on simplex, and have used this antenna and this ground plane that will not work, according to the experts. I have used it to hit a repeater 92 miles away. There's nothing special about the coax. It's just regular UHF coax. It's about 10 years old and it is getting worn out, but it still works just fine. And as you may have noticed, I also have a grounding strap that goes from the antenna mount to the tub of the Jeep. And this is my Motorola XTL 5000 radio. This is actually just the remote head of the radio. The actual guts of the radio, which is a 10-pound brick, is mounted in the back somewhere, out of sight and out of mind. This is an LMR or business type radio that was originally designed for police and fire departments, ambulances, government agencies, businesses, and so on and such forth. Mine is the UHF version, so it can do ham, 70 Seaman Eaters, GMRS FRS, GMRS and ham repeaters, digital P25, encryption, trunking, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I do not need, nor do I use. As previously mentioned, this radio does output up to 110 watts of RF electricities. However, I limit the output to about 90 watts because the radio is old and I do not want to push all of those little capacitors, diodes, and thermo twizzlers too hard. And of course, if I were to ever transmit on GMRS frequencies, I would turn down the power to 40 watts, because honestly, on the trail, there's no difference between 40 watts, 50 watts, and 100 watts. I would actually turn it down more, but the lowest this radio can go is 40 watts. I have the radio wired for power through my S-Pod, so to power it up, I just hit this switch. Now, before I go any further, I should point out that this radio is not FCC's Part 95 approved for use on GMRS. Which means that should someone ever transmit on GMRS frequencies using this radio, it would make the FCCs very, very sad. However, I should also point out that thousands of people use this type of non-GMRS approved radios every day, including many, if not mostly, licensed ham radio operators. And I should also point out that based upon the FCC's public enforcement record of going after people for simply using non-approved radios, such as this one on GMRS, one might surmise that the FCC does not really care. And one might surmise this because the FCCs have never, ever, in the last 12 years, gone after anyone for simply using a non-approved radio on GMRS frequencies. I mentioned only a moment ago that this radio can do digital P25 and encryption, so for that I use private frequencies. To use encryption and these private, or more accurately, semi-private frequencies, thou must have an LMR or business-type permission slip from the FCCs, which I do have. And no, you cannot have the call sign because it is none of your business. And the same goes with my GMRS call sign, so stop asking because call signs are only required to be announced whilst transmitting and not whilst making YouTube videos. And let not your heart be troubled, because verily I say unto you, I will be making a video about how to get those FCC's business license permission slips in the near future. And of course, because the radio also does ham 70 Seaman-Eater and ham repeaters, I always carry my ham license with me, just in case any licensed ham radio operators pull me over and demand to see it. And very importantly, this radio does not have a Roger beep. However, the radio does do MDC, which is the big boys version of a Roger beep. You may have heard MDCs over the air before. MDC sounds like this, and it is basically a digitally encoded identification that other MDC-compatible radios can read and then display on the screen. As alluded to earlier, this radio is fully compatible with GMRS radios, such as this Rocky-Talkie radio that I carry with me when I get out of the Jeep. And the actual setup and configuration of the radio is very simple, because when I am out adventuring, the very last thing that I need is more complexity. And we all know that complexity is the root of all confuculation. Normally, I keep the radio set at low power, which, as previously mentioned, is 40 watts. You can see the L on the screen indicating girly mode. I never enable any receive tones, even when on repeater channels. I always leave the receive tones off so that I can hear everyone and everything on that channel. Because, for example, if I am in the middle of nowhere and someone is stranded and calling and begging for help because they hear someone talking on a repeater, but they do not have the tone for that repeater or do not understand that they need to configure the repeater to talk on it, I will still hear them. The radio has several programmable buttons. The first button I have set up is to switch between zones, and I have the radio set up for only 2 zones. Zones are basically channel groups. The primary zone is the GMRS and FRS simplex channels, and the secondary zone is my repeaters and my private, or more accurately, semi-private frequencies. I have several semi-private and encrypted channels set up, such as Zulu for encrypted communications in my group that have encryption-capable radios. The Enigma channel is an encrypted frequency between just my Jeep and the wife's Jeep, so we can talk shit about everybody else in the group without them hearing it. Spartan is one of my semi-private frequencies for talking with others in my group that do not have encryption-capable radios. And then I have several repeaters pre-programmed in my area and in the places that I go off-roading most often. I have the power button programmed for quickly switching between low power and high power. I also have a scan button programmed, which, when enabled, will scan through all GMRS frequencies, no tones, so that I can hear everyone that might be calling and begging for help, or that might just be lonely. I have a nuisance button. This is so that if whilst scanning through all of those channels, someone is being a nuisance or I just grow weary of listening to them, I can just hit the nuisance button to temporarily remove that frequency from the scanning list. I have a monitor button to temporarily remove the tone on a channel should one be set, which it usually is not. And then on the second screen, all I have set is a squelch setting button for changing the squelch. This speaker is made specifically for this radio, and it is super, super loud. It is almost like a PA speaker. And I keep the microphone mounted above my head for quick and easy radio transmission access. And that is all there is to it. As I mentioned, I am a very simple boy, and I have very simple radio needs. And when I'm all done playing radio, I just hit the S-Pod switch to shut it all down.